By now, you know that the Big 12 conference is in the midst of chaos. By now, you know that Oklahoma and Texas are the cause of this chaos. And by now, you probably also know that people like myself are saying that West Virginia University are shouting it from the rooftops that WVU needs to get out of the sinking ship that is the Big 12 conference. But in the days of this chaos, there's been a conversation going on of where West Virginia should end up if they get out of the Big 12 conference. Some have brought up the Pac 12, maybe just because they hear the word West in West Virginia, but geographically, that's just not an option. Some have brought up the SEC to join Oklahoma and Texas, and hey, that might mean something for more money in a split of a conference, but would just be unmanageable in terms of being competitive in football and ever trying to actually have some hope of something. That would really be a brutal problem for a school and a program like the Mountaineers. Some have brought up the Big Ten, and that's an option. That wouldn't be the end of the world. Geographically, it'd be better than the situation they're in right now. That would potentially be equal or more revenue for the Mountaineers and network splits. There's a Big Ten network. It's not too shabby, let's say. Certainly better than a sinking ship that's the Big 12 without elite programs. But on this episode of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and WV Sports Now, I'm Mike Oste, and I am going to touch on the most viable option, the option that has been brought up the most, that seemingly most West Virginia fans want to be the landing spot for the Mountaineers, and the other option that was there for the Mountaineers that they certainly wanted to be a part of. Certainly that option the Mountaineers wanted to be in a decade ago when the conferences were realigned back in 2011. Let's face it, the Mountaineers wanted in the ACC. They landed in the Big 12, which certainly was a proper landing spot. I think better than some give it credit. I don't think the Big 12's been that bad. It's been okay for the Mountaineers. Certainly, they've been above competition and almost have won the Big 12 in basketball. The other sports, certainly competitive, very competitive and contending in those Olympic-style sports, and soccer certainly as well. And then, of course, football. They've had their moments. They've had their others. They're in the midst of a rebuild right now. They transition between coaches. But, hey, it could have been much worse for WVU, and the Big 12 has been an okay landing spot for WVU. But right now, it's no longer viable. Right now, it's no longer a major conference. Certainly if you lose Oklahoma and Texas, and let's face it, this is a chaotic conference right now, not where you really, really want to be. The ACC certainly looks like a better option. So I am going to now go through and compare West Virginia's case now to what it was a decade ago. Because we also can be honest that WVU was rejected a decade ago, flat out. They wanted to be in. That's honest. That's being real. They wanted to be in, and they were turned down. They wanted to go on a date with the hot girl. Hot girl said no. They had to put the tail between their legs. They eventually acted maturely about it. Hey, that was the case. Some of you acted maturely about it. They didn't continue to dwell. They brushed their shoulders off and moved on to what was still a pretty solid. They asked out of 10. Maybe they fell on an 8. And I'm not to say that the Big 12 in football has been that. The ACC has had some national champs, of course, but you could say overall depth-wise it hasn't been as good. We're just speaking football right now. Obviously, Oklahoma's been that team for the Big 12. Texas hasn't been as good as they should be. If everyone's as good as they should be, maybe the Big 12 is the better conference in football. Historically, you could maybe say that as well. Revenue splits and all of that, it's been fine. But if you're comparing the Big 12 right now without Texas and Oklahoma to the ACC, it's not even an option. And regardless of all of that, geographically, the natural rivalries, an easier travel situation for the Mountaineers, that's the ACC in comparison to the Big 12. That's where they wanted to be, but the ACC rejected the Mountaineers for two main reasons. And we'll now see if that's different right now. Two main reasons they were rejected 10 years ago. And this is in no order, but I'll just say, number one of the reasons, that was then about media markets. Media markets were a big deal then. Certainly TV markets, certainly media coverage, certainly it was all about media market or partly about media market. And they took Pitt. Pitt was going to be a member of the ACC. Okay, that made sense geographically. That made sense historically. That made sense natural rivalry. Pitt, a better academic institution, if we're certainly going to be honest, than WVU overall in terms of ranking, in terms of there are some great degrees out of WVU. I have one, journalism school, the business school, maybe even. Certainly some engineers. They got do a lot with concussions down there in Morgantown, certainly at the hospital. There has been some people of major success at WVU, okay? They do a lot with geology and in the sciences. There are some solid degrees at WVU. I can keep going on and on. And again, the journalism school, again, I have mine. Not a bad one, okay? Not the best, but not a bad one. Won some awards. The college radio station that I worked at won some awards. But overall, as a school, they kind of let in almost anybody and then let you improve yourself. That's nice. They're being nice. Certainly do it to the residents of the state. Promise scholarship that if you make them a promise, they'll let you in. They'll give you a chance. I get it. I get it's a small state. I get they want people there. I get all of that. But you're certainly eliciting the opportunity for people to fail. Because they didn't get it done in high school and you let them in, the other schools would say, no, you didn't get it done in high school. You can't come here, go somewhere else. WVU lets you in. And then if you didn't get it done in high school, very likely you don't get it done again. And then you end up failing, so that hurts you. But we'll leave the academics alone for 2 seconds here. And again, back to the media market. The media market situation for the Mountaineers, the top media market they would bring is Pittsburgh. And some could argue it's DC. But if say for the sake of argument here, say it's DC. Well, the ACC ended up with Virginia Tech and Virginia. So they're bringing the DC media market. And no, they're not on the border of DC, like, say, certain parts of Virginia or certain parts of Maryland are. But they're still bringing that media cover. DC in terms of college sports, college basketball, college football, really, because there's not a legit DC football school. There are Georgetown in basketball. Virginia gets some coverage, certainly. Virginia Tech could get some coverage, certainly. So they have that in a way already in the ACC. But in terms of Pittsburgh, they have Pitt. So you're going to bring no new major media market. And West Virginia as a state is not in comparison to Pittsburgh or DC, certainly as a media market. So the top media market or markets you would bring are already there. They already have it. They already could get it if they want it. Okay, certainly with Pittsburgh. If we're talking Pittsburgh, you already have Pitt. The media members would be overlapped. I mean, you're just not getting a difference in media market. And then, again, going to academics, West Virginia certainly was ranked lower than any school currently in the ACC or was even talked about being in the ACC. The only other conversation was Louisville, certainly similar to West Virginia in terms of academics, in terms of ranks, in terms of some good degrees, some not so good degrees, letting everybody in, not as, say, as tight on who they would let in as even other schools in their state, and certainly around WVU. Certainly West Virginia is much easier to get into than, say, Pitt, say Penn State, say Ohio State, around that region. Let's be real about that as well. And it's not to say West Virginia as an overall school has certainly dominated academically or changed that situation. They're still letting as many people in as before in terms of it being easier than those other schools in the ACC. Certainly much easier to get into than Duke, North Carolina, Syracuse, Pitt, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Florida State, Miami, flat out easier to get into than all of those schools. Flat out it is, or, any others. But Louisville. But you end up admitting, a school, Georgia Tech, like a Louisville, that doesn't end up bringing you the academics that maybe you would want in other schools. So they did tighten up on that a little bit. They did, or not tighten up, but they did get looser than they would have liked a little bit. And separate from that, the conversation has to move in terms of how important are academics now? How important are academics now to the college football realignment conversation? Are they where they were before? Because yes, academics, main reason, even more than media market wise, kept West Virginia out, made the ACC not want West Virginia 10 years ago, back in 2011, when this was a conversation. When the Mountaineers wanted in the ACC, and the ACC said no, they rejected them. They tried to act out of 10. They said no, they fell on where they fell on. And it's worked out. In some years, it's been a better conference in football than the ACC, certainly in terms of depth. You could argue maybe not at the top, but certainly in terms of depth. But again, they wanted to be in the ACC. They didn't get in there, and they were turned down. But Are academics as much of an issue now? Regardless, I don't want to argue all day whether they're better academics when they were before. Some numbers say yes, some others say no. It depends on how you look at it. I do think it's not totally fair because if the Mountaineers start getting tighter on who they let in, maybe if someone fails out in high school, they shouldn't let you in to that university, regardless of where you live, and they want to give you a chance. I get it. Maybe it's hurting the overall perception of the school, and certainly for these conversations, if they get tighter on who they let in, they immediately would probably improve in some of those situations, a lot more money in a lot of these academic departments than maybe was even there 10 years ago. A lot of those programs and extracurricular things, and say the college radio station at UND2 that I worked at in college, doing more things, getting more revenue, bigger and better than it was 10 years ago in many respects. So that in a way helps academics because you have more options, could send you on to a career. And the success of people in the last 10 years who have graduated, including a rocket scientist who's done shows with Bill Nye, the science guy. Got to give Emily a plug there. Certainly helps you academic-wise. Certainly helps you academic-wise, to say the very least. And what we learned more about concussions, giving credit to WVU there in terms of the science, in terms of what they've done at that hospital and connecting it back there. So it's better. I'm not going to say it's not. And I'm not going to say I'm not proud of my degree. I'm not going to say my degree is crap, but it's not to the academics of any of those schools. It just isn't. I can't deny that. But is that a factor? Is that important now? Right now, conference realignment, and to these conferences, it needs to be about money. Number one, above academics, above all else, really, it needs to be about money. Does this school make money for you? Will this school make you money, make you more money? Is it a plus for you in your bottom line, in your revenue? Is this going to be good financially? 10 years ago, I think it would have been, but I could understand maybe some concern in some respects. Certainly the Olympic sports were not there. A lot of them were being built up. The baseball program was nothing. It was being run by a controversial figure. It just, yeah, you had Jed Jerko, who certainly went on to have a Major League Baseball career, but overall as a program, it wasn't where it is now. And yeah, some Big East tournaments, etc., but it wasn't where it is now. It was peaks and valleys. It, again, was not where it was or where it is now. The women's basketball program, good. Certainly looks better now because of consistency. Soccer programs looking better because of consistency, keeping it up all the way through. There's been gold medalists. There's been a rifle champion. There's been a national championship based on that rifle program all since then. You go to the men's basketball program, which men's basketball second to football. Football won, but then men's basketball about all of this in terms of where the money comes from. Coming off of Final Four. So can't say it wasn't coming off of the high of that Final Four, but now they're further into it. Bob Huggins has been there longer. It's been a decade, consistent success. Not another Final Four, but Sweet 16s, deep tournament runs. Some years may be disappointing, but certainly they've proven themselves in that Big 12 championship game, playing those games with Kansas, some big wins. Yes, the Final Four hasn't happened again, and you're coming off the Final Four, but that was more of like an aberration where you're looking at maybe 5 years of dominant play of the Elite Eight, the Sweet 16, the NIT title, John Beilein building it up after it really wasn't anything for a while prior to that. Bob Huggins takes it over, molds the team, presses the right buttons, gets into that Final Four. Obviously, an historic, special year for the history of the program, and that's right before that. But consistency and keeping it up certainly is a benefit. And the football program coming off some big wins, certainly some bowl games, the Pat White, Steve Slayton era, certainly some major events, certainly some New Year's Day bowl games, BCS championships, all over the place. That 4-year stretch overall in terms of success, you got to put that with any other 4-year stretch in Mountaineer history. But again, you got to see the Orange Bowl. You got to see some more consistent success, and maybe the football program's not better off in terms of those wins or big wins since then, even though there have been some. But doing it in the Big 12, you're seeing more money there. You're seeing more revenue there. You're seeing facilities. The facilities of the football program in particular are light years from where they were a decade ago. They've used that money, that TV split being in the Big 12. Maybe they use the Big 12 to their benefit if they're not in there forever. Maybe they use them and abuse them, and now they're going to go on to the sunset if they can get in the ACC, and hey, that would work out. Maybe in retrospect, that would have been better because They were able to build, again, we have the video on Pittsburgh Sports Live of Neil Brown giving the tour of the new facility. It is way, way improved from where it was. Not to say it was bad where it was when I was a student, but man, it looks like a major program. Again, this is why they can't follow the AAC or something like that. It's a major program vibe. Recruiting has been there. Now they have a young coach who wants to be there, who everyone loves being there in the midst of only year 3 of a rebuild. They have gone through that coaching transition, but they're better off now than they would have been a year ago coming into the season, or 2 years ago, certainly after Holgorsen. Hubbard was kind of bare then. So whatever you think of the Holgorsen era, there were some big wins. They were good enough still on the field in that last decade, if not the instant success and the big success prior to that previous conference realignment. But academics, not as big of a deal as it would have been 10 years ago. Certainly some reasons to say it might have been improved than it was 10 years ago, but it's not going to be the level of any of the other ACC schools, okay? There's some schools in the ACC right now that are borderline, Miami could be argued to be borderline an Ivy League school. Certainly Duke could be argued to be borderline an Ivy League school. They're brutal to get in. Syracuse, fantastic. Pitt, in terms of education, okay? It's not going to be there. It just isn't. But how important are academics now? Or is academics enough of an issue for you now, if you're the ACC, to look over everything else, what they've done athletic program-wise overall? They're one of the few athletic programs in the country that had rankings in men's basketball, in women's basketball, and in football, all in that calendar year. You're looking at the consistent success of many of those programs. Baylor, UConn, Tennessee, and a couple others, really maybe just even those, are probably the only overall basketball programs that are better if you couple in the men's and women's together and what they've done over a consistent period of time, okay? They bring a lot. They bring the facilities. They bring a brand. They bring fan interest. They bring eyeballs, which will then segue me into the media market conversation. Yeah, okay, if you want to say Pittsburgh and DC, from whatever argument you want to be on, is the biggest media market they would bring in terms of coverage, in terms of some interest, in terms of where they would fit on TVs, etc., no matter where people live regionally, because West Virginia is not that, even though, of course, most fans, plenty of the coverage, that's where they are home base, but that's not the biggest media market they would bring. It's not as big of a deal as it would have been 10 years ago. I get 10 years ago that if you already have Pitt, you don't need WVU. If you already had Louisville, you don't need Cincinnati. If you already had one school, you don't need the other if they're bringing the same media market. I get it. I got that conversation then, and maybe they should have been more forward thinking, but cable and TV markets, not as big of a deal now. This is all about a lot of digital coverage. We're doing here at the Now Network. Digital media is a thing right now, the present and the future. It is about subscribers. I cut the cord on cable. I'm working on YouTube TV and tons of other apps, and I'm paying less to do so than I would have been otherwise. It's not about cable companies, okay? Doesn't matter what Comcast does, because someone jokingly said to me, well, maybe this will help get Comcast back on board if you bring in WVU, since that's been an issue with the ACC network in the Pittsburgh area. Doesn't even matter, honestly. I mean, that's funny. Maybe that would. Maybe that could be a plus for you if you want to say it. Obviously, they want a new TV deal. Another team is necessary. Why not WVU? For all the reasons I've listed so far, that's their leverage. But separate from that, it's about eyeballs. It's about subscribers. West Virginia is enough of a national fan base to bring you eyeballs, to bring you subscribers, okay? More so than some teams in there right now. If we're talking about subscribers, West Virginia would bring you more eyeballs and more subscribers than Virginia does, than Georgia Tech does, then maybe we're looking at the same neighborhood as Pitt, probably more than Syracuse, because you're looking at just basketball in terms of elite contendership, not really football all the time. So overall, are you bringing in those eyeballs? Duke, North Carolina, even if they're not great in football, I'll give it to them because they're powerhouses and historic elite programs in basketball-wise, and they're not going anywhere. But Wake Forest, North Carolina State, great academic institutions, sometimes good. North Carolina State had that year with Jim Valvano went way back there when we're talking about the early to mid-'80s. Otherwise, these are just average programs generally in both football and men's basketball, which is, again, what we're talking about here, the number one and number two of this. We're mostly even talking just about football. And are they bringing you more eyeballs and subscribers right now? No. If cable's gone totally and it's just about eyeballs and subscribers on these apps or digital platforms, because that's definitely the thing, they're not bringing any more eyeballs and subscribers. I don't even know if Pitt is, honestly. I don't have the numbers in front of me. That probably is a dead heat even situation. Is Louisville? Are we adding football in? overall, are they? In terms of what they could bring, eyeballs and subscribers, when you couple in what the men's basketball and football do together, overall interest, overall fans, overall athletic program, overall subscribers and eyeballs for every event in the whole conference, but certainly football. If we're just saying football, eyeballs and subscribers, I got to say WVU is certainly not last, certainly probably above the middle, certainly maybe even at the top in some respects in terms of eyeballs and subscribers. Certainly a benefit there. Certainly even ratings. I think the ratings, if we care about cable, would absolutely do it as well. So that kind of knocks out the academics and media market situation from 10 years ago. I got it. Academics and media market, you don't need to add it on with Pitt. You already got Pitt. You don't need Pittsburgh again. And the academics weren't there. I think the academics are better. Okay, I'm still proud of my degree. I'll tell you that right now. But I think the academics are better. I also think the academics aren't nearly as important as they were 10 years ago because, yes, you want to maybe still be a certain eliteness, certainly prestigiousness. You don't want WVU's overall academic rank to bring everything in the school down. If everyone in the school is 101 or under and WVU is 160 or whatever, you don't want that to come down. I get it. Maybe they'd be last in academics. Okay, but is that enough to ruin and to forget every other benefit and positive that sometimes, if not most of the time, are greater and outweigh many of the current schools in the ACC? And obviously geography means nothing because you're Atlantic coast and you have Syracuse, not on the Atlantic coast, landlocked in. Pittsburgh, not on the Atlantic coast, landlocked in. Yeah, Philly, maybe you drive an hour, get to Jersey, you get some beach, but that's 5 hours away from Pittsburgh at that point. It can't be about that. Okay, they changed the name of the thing. Maybe they should change the name of some of these conferences because geography just absolutely means absolutely nothing. But the media market is not nearly as big of a deal. Yeah, you're bringing in no new major media market, and they don't probably care about having West Virginia as a media market. I get it. You already have Pitt. You don't need WVU for Pittsburgh. You already have some coverage that can connect some way to DC if needed. You don't need the Mountaineers just for that. I get it. I totally get it, but it's not as big of a deal as it was 10 years ago. It's about eyeballs and subscribers. West Virginia as an athletic program, but certainly in football and even certainly in men's basketball will bring you more eyeballs and more subscribers than many of the programs currently in the ACC, certainly combined for what they do overall as athletic programs. So I do believe the Mountaineers' case right now for the ACC, which is the most viable option, the best option for the future of the program, a place they'd want to be for decades upon decades, on end. It would feel a little bit like the old Big East. They'd have the natural rivalries back. It makes the most sense. If they don't want to do this, okay, then you beg if you're Shane Lyons to get to the Big Ten because that would still be okay. That still has some elite programs. The money split's still there. Strength of schedule's still there. You can still make it attractive for some out-of-conference games. The geography and the travel is not as bad as it currently is, honestly. It would actually be better than it currently is still, and it's still a major conference vibe. And it would be kind of cool to play Penn State in conference, Ohio State in conference, Michigan State, Michigan in conference. Maybe you'd actually have a legitimate rivalry with Ohio State rather than just Mountaineer fans hating Ohio State and being jealous a little bit of Ohio State. And I don't think Ohio State fans care about WVU, but they would actually play in football. Of course, they do in men's basketball, and WVU's had some big wins over OSU there. But maybe that would actually be something, and it would probably be similar to the Oklahoma rivalry where they're going to beat you all the time. And maybe it would be similar probably, where you're looking at a rare special year to have a chance to win the conference once every half decade or so, mostly middle of the pack in the conference. Maybe Neil Brown will work his magic. It'll be more. Your bowl tie-ins, though, will be really, really good. So if you don't win it, certainly you can fall into something. The playoff expanding now, maybe a special year where you don't win the conference with Michigan still floundering and Ohio State ends up being that champ. Maybe you beat out the others in a year every few, and you get in as a 12 seed. If we don't expand beyond that, if we expand beyond that, then you get in even as a third team in the conference. That'll be fine. So that's not out of the realm of possibility. That could occur. That's not going to occur in the current Big 12 without Oklahoma and Texas. They're going to say that strength of schedule is not there. Not winning it's going to look really, really bad. Anything other than being behind Oklahoma State, who probably will be the top dog in the conference overall, is going to look really, really bad. You're going to have the out-of-conference games, sure, but your overall strength of schedule won't be there. And if you have a 4-loss season, it's going to look worse than a 4-loss season with Oklahoma and Texas in there. And you know they're still going to lay some eggs and lose some games. They're not going to go undefeated. So, and in basketball, you might win it, but you're still going to have Kansas there unless Kansas would leave. But if Kansas leaves, then it's even going to look worse in basketball. So winning it would not mean anything, and you get in the tournament anyway. I get it, but your seeding might be worse. They might be less impressed in the strength of schedule, which they do rely on to get solid seedings, to have a chance in March. So it's just not a major conference vibe with the facilities, with the money. You want that TV contract. The TV contract for the next deal with the current Big 12 without Oklahoma and Texas, regardless who else is in there, if WVU is, it's not going to be nearly as attractive. You might not even get one with where we are headed in terms of cable. The money split, not going to be great. You're going to really be hurt recruiting-wise if you do not have a solid TV deal. And your facilities, you have them what they are now, they're not going to all of a sudden get blown up. But it's just going to hurt you recruiting-wise if you're not in that major conference, not in that major conference feel. So they need out of the Big 12 as it is a sinking ship if this is going to continue to happen with Oklahoma and Texas. And the ACC makes the most sense. Pac-12 doesn't, SEC doesn't. Those reasons are really obvious, or should be. Big Ten, okay. If it has to be Big Ten, okay. Maybe they'd be a little more lenient in terms of academics. Okay. They don't have Pittsburgh. They have Penn State, and that's some Pittsburgh media market, but that maybe connects more to Philly or middle of the state. Maybe they want the Pittsburgh media market. Maybe they want that from Pitt, for crying out loud. But okay, WVU, I don't think that's the end of the world. I think they would be maybe even more welcoming if WVU wants to do that. Who knows? The bowl tie-ins could still be fine. That would be okay. But the most viable option, the option that makes the most sense, that everybody wants to be the answer here, it's seemingly unanimous with anyone around the program, in the program, whether they want to say this publicly, certainly fans and alums of the program, is the ACC. The academic's not as big of a deal as it was 10 years ago and certainly has improved in many respects if you look deep. Maybe the school does need to tighten things up on who they admit, who they let in there, to try to beef that up and make that even more attractive academically. Could even improve the school overall in terms of prestige. I wouldn't hate it. I already got my degree. Media market and double dipping with Pitt and maybe DC, with Pittsburgh and maybe DC in terms of major media markets and not caring about the West Virginia State media market. Okay, but it's now about eyeballs and subscribers, and WVU would bring eyeballs and subscribers. Obviously, athletically, they're there. Obviously, they would bring fan interest. Obviously, they would help revenue in the bottom line because of the revenue, because of the interest, because of the eyeballs, because of the subscriptions, because of the fan interest. Look at the numbers of our sites, for crying out loud. They got a rabid fan base that would give a damn, maybe more so than other schools that are already there. They would fit in geographically. The schools that are there would vote them in. Pitt would be fine with them being in. I know this. They like having that good relationship between the two athletic programs. A Pitt would vote them down. That would ruin that. Pitt doesn't want to do that. They'd be welcoming to them. I don't think there's the hatred that stays there for Penn State. I think it's more of a healthy, respectful rivalry between Pitt and West Virginia. The other schools, I think majority of them would be fine with it. It would make sense geographically. The natural rivalries would return. You still would have a legit strength of schedule. You still would have a legit conference. Maybe you wouldn't win it. It'd be the same situation with Clemson still dominating, but it would maybe even be more winnable since it's just Clemson. It's not Oklahoma. And if Texas can turn it around again in terms of elite programs. But WVU's situation and their case to the ACC, better now than it was a decade ago. Absolutely better now than it was when the conferences were realigned back in 2011. And it makes sense, as I've said before, and I'll say it 1,000 times, no matter what ends up happening. WVU in the ACC makes sense for West Virginia, of course. And I know the ACC doesn't need West Virginia as much as maybe West Virginia needs the ACC right now, but it absolutely makes sense for the ACC as well. WVU and the ACC makes sense for WVU, but also makes a lot of sense for the ACC. And West Virginia in the ACC, in the Atlantic Coast Conference, would be a benefit for, of course, the Mountaineers, as they kind of need rescued, and Shane Lyons need to be begging, if anything, but also would be an incredible benefit for the ACC as well. Make sure to hit that subscribe button there, bottom of the video. Hit that subscribe button, smash it. We love it. We love the commentary alignment talk. It's been good for the channel, good for the site, but we appreciate it if you're here. Leave a comment. As you saw from the other videos, I will comment back. We will continue the discussion on in the comments. Comment there. I'll talk to you. We appreciate the comments. You could say everything I've been saying is crap. You disagree. Put it there. I'll still reply. I'll still engage. You keep it respectful. We're going to keep it there. If you don't, it will be removed, but we'll appreciate the comment nonetheless for the engagement. Also, of course, follow all the sites, but especially WV Sports Now. Find them on Twitter at WV Sports Now on Twitter. this channel at PGH Sports Live. Again, subscribe and also hit up WVSportsNow.com with all of this coverage as we're keeping the tabs on what's going on with this chaos in the Big 12. But if you leave this show with nothing else, the ACC, of course, makes sense for West Virginia, but it also makes sense for the ACC. It would be a benefit to West Virginia for many reasons, but also it would be a benefit to the ACC for many reasons as well.